Aydin, thank you so much for joining us today, man.
Yeah, excited to be here. I know we were looking forward to doing this for a while, so glad that we're finally doing it.
Yeah, me too, me too. All right, why don't we start with the origin as you know is easiest to do. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey building Fellow.
Yeah, I mean, super quickly, like I've been like very passionate about like building businesses and entrepreneurship since a very early age, and have done a few startups now. One I would say call it successful failure. It was a failure, but it was a success because it led myself and my co-founding team to continue to work together. Then we did another company in the online survey space. Grew to just under 100 people, bootstrapped, had successful acquisition to SurveyMonkey, worked at SurveyMonkey for a few years. And one of the things that we learned, and basically Fellow, which is a company we're building today, is, comes from the lessons and the insights that we got during our time working at SurveyMonkey. But essentially, the broad premise, and I know there's a lot of founders and CEOs in the audience, but like the way we think about it is all you have as a founder or CEO is the collective time of the people who work in your organization. That's your like largest lever, right? And today in organizations everywhere, people spend up to 30% of that organizational bandwidth in meetings. So we thought like if there was one place where we could make a really big impact to really increase efficiency, productivity, save organizations time, it would be meetings. And so that's what Fellow is. Fellow is the solution to the meeting problem. Helps people have productive, effective meetings. Helps people spend less time in meetings, and that's really what we're focused on today.
So I got a lot of questions on Fellow. I want to take us back to some of the earlier stuff that you said because I think it's fascinating that you've been working on building companies with partners or co-founders for quite a while, or better part of the last couple of decades. A few startups, a few products. Just talk to me about what life is like, in building and creating the different things, but with the same co-founding team, and why you've chosen to do that with those people for so many years.
Yeah, I think like probably the major lesson that I've learned in just building businesses and in life in general, it's going to sound super obvious, but something doesn't work, don't do it. And then if something works, keep doing it. And so I know that sounds very basic, but I feel like it applies to so many different things, right? Like we think about just building businesses in a very agile way, in an MVP style way. You do little things. If it works, you double down. If it works some more, you double down some more. And so, yeah, my co-founders and I, this is our third startup together, working together for more than 16 years, 3 different startups, 5 different products that we've built. And it's just, we're extremely complementary. We have a super high bandwidth language, working with each other. We've been through all the trials, all the forming and the storming, and all that stuff. It's just it's really nice. And I know you talk to a lot of founders, but this is like such a critical. The founder relationship is so critical. So many companies break up because the founders can't get along or something doesn't work. And when you really learn how to work well together with a series of people, it's one of the most magical things ever, right? And so if you can find a team like that you really work well with, then you want to stick to that team, forever and ever. There's so many studies on this, by the way. Like I've actually looked into this concept of like teams forming together and how important it is. But there's actually a lot of studies done on this. So for example, if you take a star analyst at a financial firm and you take them out of that firm and put them in another firm, it'll take up to 5 years for them to gain like the same status and the same productivity. The only exception is if they get deployed with their team. So there's a lot about like finding the right team to work with. And I think this is something that's known, which is, most of the benefits in life come from compounding. And so if you can compound a relationship for a longer and longer period of time, I think it just becomes more and more fruitful. So As long as those two will continue to work with me, I'll keep doing this for a long time. And it's not just them too, right? Like I know, Jim, you've been involved in a bunch of different companies, and like to the extent you can, other people in the team. Like we have so many people at Fellow that used to work with us at Fluidware and SurveyMonkey. And it's just great. Like we enjoy working with each other. We think they're awesome. And so, yeah, like if you can take the same team and work together for a long time, it's magic.
So how have you been able to maintain that productive and positive working relationship with that team over the years? I mean, I imagine you obviously go through your own dirt or your own trials, tribulations, right? And you know things aren't always good. But what has it been that's allowed you to, or any systems that you've had in place that have allowed you to really, take a step back and maintain that positive working relationship over the years?
Yeah. So I think like as with anything, like the first, like the first little bit is harder, right? Because in the first little bit of any relationship, you're learning to work with each other, right? You're learning what to trust each other with, who should be focused on this or that. So in the beginning, yeah, you're going to have some arguments. You're going to figure out like, we should do it my way or your way or something like that. But then, once you have once this plays out for a while, you really know like what I call it, like the believability index. Like for a certain topic, if we have differing opinions, whose opinion should we take? Because we know that like historically in this like class of issue, like this person tends to be more right. But so that's something you develop. But in the early days, and I think this is super useful. So in the early days, what I would say is we would, if something was something that we really disagreed on, we might have a 1 to 10 scale of how important is it to you that like how important is this to you that we go your way. And if you say that it's an 8 and for me like it's important, but if it's a 4, I should just let you have it and we'll go your way, right? And but once we commit, obviously we go full in. There's no I told you so. There's no any of that stuff. But you can't say I'm a 10 every time because that doesn't work either, right? And we certainly have stuff like that today. So we'll make decisions, and I can think of a decision the three of us we're thinking about related to our product, and I was like, look, I disagree, but both of you think we should do this, and so let's do it. Like it's and there's equally as many times where they will let me, like, because I feel very confident and passionate about us going a certain way. So yeah, I think like that's the key, is just to have like a framework of when there are disagreements, how to address them. But I think what happens now is like, I just have so much, like, and I really mean this, like so much trust and respect for both Amin and Sam, who are my co-founders. And I mean, there's like, I couldn't see myself working with anyone else. It's just like, I trust them so much in their individual areas that, what they say to me is as if something that like I came up with myself.
Yeah, that's cool. That's it's a lot of collaboration, a lot of design around making things work. Are there any specific instances where you've, can you share any of the challenges where it's been really hard working through the partnership and how you were able to navigate them?
I think it's one of the things that we thought about when starting Fellow, for example, was, so the way that it works is I'm the CEO. Amin is the head of product. He's the chief product officer, and Sam is the chief technology officer. So when starting Fellow, which obviously, again, like we've worked together a bunch, but we had to set aside some like decision-making frameworks on how we approach certain, decisions and ideas. And so it's, it's easy to say that, hey, Amin, you're the chief product officer, therefore you make all product decisions and like nobody questions it. But the problem with that is that, as you know, for a software company, like the product is everything. The product is the company, right? Like
Yeah.
it's just, so you can't really have like one person just saying, I'm going to do all of the things. And so the framework that we each have an important contribution to the product roadmap. So I'm very, customer focused, very like industry focused. What's going on? What do our customers say? I love talking to customers, to users. I want to feel their pain. I want to like be in their shoes. And so what I bring to like that equation is, okay, like here's like the customer viewpoint. Here's how we should think about like our users and the problems we're trying to solve. And so for me, it's important to get alignment on what is the problem that we're trying to solve. And it's not just like a macro thing. It could be about like an individual feature that we're building. Like what is the main, job to be done, problem to solve. And Amin is really, really good at then being able to say, okay, what is like the most practical, best way to solve that problem? Right. And then Sam's viewpoint is like, what is the best possible way to technically execute on that? So we each have a piece of it, but in the beginning, we didn't start that way, right? So in the beginning, we were like, we should do it this way. And they would say we do it that way. And we would have arguments, but then we said, okay, like, let's go back to this idea of the believability index. We each have different data flows that formulate our opinions. Why is my opinion different than yours and different than yours? And then we kind of figured out that, okay, our opinions are coming from these places. And when you put the three of them together, you get a really well-formed decision. But we just have to figure out like which part of that decision or information flow comes from each one of the people. I know it sounds like a little bit like, but when there is like disagreement, we always like to take a step back and say, what is the system that is leading to a disagreement versus saying they have a different opinion than I do. So we try to take like a system viewpoint, break it down, and get to that decision.
Yeah, that's cool. And it goes back to your earlier point around needing to work together for a while in order for some of that to pop out, right? You could have the all-stars in the room. That doesn't mean that if Michael Jordan goes over to the Pistons that he's going to be Michael Jordan in that team atmosphere, right? It's
so different. True. So
right?
True. Which is why, like, whenever you're hiring, as the best way to hire is, hey, who have you worked with, Jim, that you really enjoyed working with as a counterpart in whatever company. And if you can bring so much of, the productivity of teams is the ability to work well together. And yes, you can get there with other people, but if you can accelerate that because you've already built that trust, the working relationship, knowing how to get, the rapport, if you can short circuit that, like, I think that's the real power of teams. Because otherwise it'll just take a time, right? Like, what if it takes another 6 to 9 months to get to that level of productivity together? And I think, that's the real magic.
So you had one company that successfully failed. You had one company that exited this really small company called SurveyMonkey, right? And now you're building your third. Which success, the failure or the big exit, would you say was actually more impactful towards you guys figuring out the way that you jived and the way that you melded as a team?
Yeah. I mean, I think all of them contributed a lot, and it's very interesting. Like, sometimes we change. We like to say that, Fellow is a bus, and we know what our destination is. And, sometimes people change their seats on the bus, and like, we think of it that way too. So in our last company, for example, I played the role. I had a co-CEO, but I was kind of in the CEO role, and then Amin was in the chief technology role, and then Amin and Sam swapped seats in this company. So we do stuff like that too. But I think with the last company, it was a longer stretch. We're talking about probably, from start to acquisition was 6.5 years, but then we spent another more than 2 years at SurveyMonkey. Right. So we just had, collectively, like, probably more than 8 to 9 year period of working together. And you really start to understand over a longer period of time who's good at what, and then you let that inform the next stage. So even as we think about it right now, as we're growing Fellow, every now and then we'll get together and we'll say, what is the best structure for the company going forward? And we are all okay changing seats on the bus, having like different teams or departments rolling up to different people. And the only thing that matters is that the company succeeds. And then we try and get everybody on our team to think that too. One of the quotes that I really love is this, careers are not ladders, they're jungle gyms. So you just go, like, it's not like this straight path up. You'll do a little bit of this, you'll do a little bit of that, things will change. And it's not this linear path. And so I think like that's something that we've tried to foster across the company, not just like amongst the co-founders, but amongst everybody. And I think like that's just a very healthy attitude to a company in the scaling stage.
So when you look at, I agree. Number one. Number two, when you look at the success that you guys had in exiting to SurveyMonkey, which a lot of people listening in, that's like a dream come true, exiting to a business like that, right? Or at least at the very least, they think it is. That's their dream. So, what did life look like during that 2-year stint when, after the exit, right? Like what did you have to do differently? What continued the same? What lessons can you give to folks listening in about, once you get to that promised land, how to navigate it?
Yeah. So I think for any founders listening in, I think no matter how much you prep for it, obviously we went into this wanting to do this and we were very happy with the outcome and it was all great. And there's many, many great, like everything was great about it. The problem is like when you spend, and I was probably 29 when we sold the company, which was quite a while ago now. But the first feeling is, your business becomes your identity, right? Like this is like the company is you. Like you kind of like I would almost go so far as to say I don't know that I had a separate identity from it. And then you sell the company and you just sold your identity. So who are you? So you kind of go through this like existential crisis of, who am I? What am I doing? And those sorts of things. So I will say that the next 6 months, like I think it was like one day of euphoria. And then it was probably like 6 months of feeling lost, in a very deep psychological way. And then it's like finding your ground and then figuring out, okay, like what am I doing? What am I doing next? And so obviously like, the whole time I was at SurveyMonkey, I think just from, navigating post acquisition, probably one of the biggest mistakes that I made was it took me a long time to really truly put the SurveyMonkey hat on. And what I mean by that is like, I was still focused on, our product, our team. And even though if you asked me that, I wouldn't have like told you this specifically, but like, it just took me a while to say, no, like we're no longer that other company. And, we were two companies competing, right? And we had a slightly different approach. We were more enterprise and SurveyMonkey at the time was not. And it just took me a while to just realize that, no, now we're a different company and this is what we're doing. And as a result, I have to play that game and really be the person that bridges the gap between, our employee base and everybody else. And so I think that probably took me longer than it should have to realize. So that's one thing. You realize that like you are no longer, the CEO, you're no longer the founder. And now your mission is to make the new company successful and like really, truly own that. Yeah. So that's probably like the biggest lesson that I learned. And then the other part was, couldn't wait to go back and do it again. So here we are.
Yeah, here we are. And you guys are doing some pretty awesome work at Fellow. You've been now at it for about how long?
Yeah. So we incorporated the company earlier in 2017, but what we started building is not what we do today. So there's a pivot in the middle. And I would say the current version of Fellow we launched in, I would say, end of 2019. So this product's probably been in market close to 4 years.
So was this a pivot in strategy, business model, price? Like what sort of pivot are we talking about here?
I think it was a pivot in the product completely. I don't know how useful this is for anybody listening, trying to figure out what their next gig is, or like the next company they want to found is. But and I get that asked all the time. So it's, people who have sold companies or want to do their next thing. I get to talk to a lot of people like that. And, my learnings from that period were that when we started the first company, like I did no research. We did no research. We didn't so much a look at to see how many other online survey companies there were, because if we had done so much as a Google search, it would have probably dissuaded us, and we would have never started that company. We knew about SurveyMonkey, but we didn't do so much as a Google search, which is very naive, right? But sometimes being naive turns out to be good. But the second time around, I really wanted to do my research. Like going into Fellow, I wanted to spend the time, and the second time around, you just know so much more. Like all the reasons why something won't work, right? And that's bad, because you can stop yourself from doing mostly everything. And so I was, we were thinking about ideas and investigating stuff, and anything that we would find a reason why we shouldn't do it. We do research. If you do enough research, you're going to find some competitor somewhere too. Right. And you're like, okay, well, this has been done before, and you'll find all the reasons not to do something. So basically my conclusion from that period was I gave myself a 6-month deadline. And what I said was that at the end of 6 months, I'm going to do the least bad idea. And I'm just going to start it, because there's a super high likelihood that whatever I start is going to pivot anyway. And I had talked to a bunch of people. Even my own experience in my last company was also a pivot. And so we'd done so many pivots, and I'd seen so many other businesses pivot, that I thought what was more important was to start something. Because once you start something and you really start working on it and you really start talking to customers, it'll kind of lead you to the thing you should actually focus on. So for example, for Fellow, the first thing that we were actually focused on was we were trying to build a tool for managers. Like that was the primary motivation. We were trying to build something that we were calling a manager's co-pilot, just a tool for managers. We thought there was software for every part of the organization, but nobody had really built something for managers of teams. And so that's the product we wanted to build. And in starting to build that, when the pandemic happened, we learned a bunch of different things. So we had built all these components, but when the pandemic happened, we realized that actually, of all of the things that we've built, the thing that people use the most and are getting the most value out of is everything that we built around meetings. And so when that happened, we really had to take a hard look and say, okay, yes, we've built all these things, but this is the part that's working. I like to call it our Instagram moment. We had built all these features, and then like there's this one part that worked the best. So we kind of like cut everything out, reposition the company, refocus the product to really highlight and showcase those areas. And then went from being a manager's co-pilot to what we today call a meeting productivity platform. And so that was the major pivot at Fellow.
And was any of that out of a lack of need on the manager side, or simply bigger opportunity in where you ended up?
Yeah, so it's there were a lot of I think it was a lot of things going well together. We were having some success in the other area too. But it just turned out that in this new area, I think one of the big enablers for us at the time was to use Fellow. You need to obviously use a computer. You need to use your phone. You need to use your laptop. And prior to the pandemic, you would have to, if you wanted to use Fellow, you would have to take your laptop into a meeting room. you would have to look at your device instead of at each other. And a lot of people did that. But we had a lot of objections to that as well, right? Like a lot of people would say no devices in our meetings. And now every meeting is on a device. And so this was like a great enabler. So what we saw was just like a lot more interest, like the market demand was a lot more suited towards that area. And so we just followed, we said, what's the path of least resistance? And it was a lot easier to, tackle that space. And so we moved the company's direction to focus on that.
And how has your team managed to adapt and change direction and in the face of all these new industry trends, challenges, pivots? How does the team manage to change and shift? Was that a hard shift?
So I think when we did the shift, we were small. We were maybe 12 people or so, 10 or 12 people. So it's definitely easier to change when you're smaller. So that's one thing. Now, like when we think about the future, I mean, again, these days, I'm sure you've had guests that talk about AI, right? Like this is a major platform shift like we've never seen before. And so I see this as like also one of the big moments where as a company, as a product, we have to adapt, we have to change. And what I find is the best way to get a team or a company or organization to change is doing really good storytelling around it. If people can buy into the why we need to change, why it's important, and they can understand the rationale, the logic, and why it's the best thing to do, I think people get behind it. What people don't get behind is, hey, we have to do this. This is what's best for our customers. That's just like a blanket statement. But if you can really, truly articulate and do great storytelling, then that's what makes the difference. One of the things that I like to do at Fellow, it's a new thing that I picked up at Fellow. I didn't really do this at my last company, but one of the things I do is every week I send a weekly email to the company. And yes, it includes some, North Star metrics and things like that. But really, like my purpose behind that email is to be the storyteller of explaining where we are and why we are here and like what next looks like. There's this great analogy. I forget who I learned this from, but for the rest of the team, like when you're a founder and you're operating, like if you think of your startup as this bus, as I described earlier, you get the front row seat, right? You see all the things that are coming, you see all the scenery, and then you have some people that are sitting, not in the front of the bus. And so for them, and it's almost like a bus that has no windows for them, right? And so they can't really see all the things that you're seeing. So the best thing that you can do as a CEO, as a founder, is really sort of articulate everything that's going on around you so everybody can also see what you're seeing. If they see what you're seeing, then if everybody had the same information flow, chances are that they would make the same sorts of decisions. So the big thing is just building the context for the rest of your team and your company. And if they see what you see, then it's very likely that they will believe what you believe. And I think like that's part of the, how do you get people to buy into something new and different?
So what advice can you provide to other business leaders that might be considering a pivot in their own companies?
Yeah. So one thing I'll say is that the way that I'm articulating it right now is it sounds like we got some data and then it was super obvious and then we dropped everything. I told a great story and everyone was like, let's go. And then we shifted. So the reality was we got some data. It got us, thinking. There's customer conversations and we were like, should we do this? We told the investors that we were going to build this other thing. Like, are we sure that we want to, do, like, there was a lot of back and forth, a lot of thinking, and we really did it a little bit at a time. So we started by changing our messaging and trying different customer conversations and directing things in a different angle. Then we started with a, A/B test on our website with new messaging and saw how that worked. And so there were a lot of things. So I don't think it has to be like you jump into something new. Maybe in some cases it does. In our case, there was an opportunity to test this new way and then see if it was the right thing to do. And so we kind of eased into it at that time.
So when you guys are now kind of become like a leader in the meeting management software space, and I imagine that the landscape has changed quite a bit since you started Fellow. What have those changes look like, and where do you see the space going over the next few years?
Yeah. So I think, the way that we think about it is because of, I mean, again, the big impetus, meetings have always been a problem, right?
Always.
Everybody's always complained about meeting. What has changed over the last, since the pandemic has happened, right? It's always, again, important to think about the why. So since the pandemic has happened, because a lot of people aren't in the office all the time, a lot of the chance meetups and, the chance, discussions that happen aren't happening naturally. So as a result, you have to be more purposeful around the way that you connect. And the way that you connect happens to be a lot of times in meetings. So what has happened is like the meeting count in organizations everywhere has jumped. And it depends what data source you look at. Microsoft has some studies here. There are other ones done by other organizations, but in some cases, people's meetings counts have gone up as much as 2 to 2.5x from where they were. And that's a major, major change. So when you think about it,
They were already crazy high, right?
Yeah, nobody was saying that I have too few meetings even
Right.
before, right? And so all of a sudden you've got this thing that is, again, as we started our conversation, up to 30% of your organization's time is spent doing this one thing. Like, what other thing can you think of that is that big, right? Like as a proportion across all the different types of departments. So I think what ends up happening over the course of time, and the way we like to think about it, is that meeting productivity just becomes a category, and it becomes, a tool that you're going to need over the course of time to make sure that when you do connect with others, when you do collaborate, that you're making effective use of your time. I think a lot of that will be AI powered. And I'm not just talking about, basic things like, an AI assistant will take notes for you. That's the super basic stuff. We like to think of it as, you will have a chief of staff that follows you around wherever you go, helps you prep for meetings, helps you talk about the most important things. During the conversation, we'll give you hints and tips on how to navigate that conversation and everything else. It's like your personal chief of staff that follows you around to every meeting. And I think that's what software starts to look like over the course of time. And I think meetings are, again, a big surface area where this could definitely take place.
Yeah, and I mean, you guys are number one meeting management software on G2. Tons of teams, tons of big companies using you guys. Productive team meetings, meaningful one-on-ones, collaborative meeting agendas. I mean, it sounds like you guys are, potentially on the leading edge of some of that opportunity. What is the end vision for where you'd like to take Fellow?
Yeah. So, I mean, the way we have to, this is an important topic, which is, I think you just have to, when you think about a question like, where do you want to take Fellow? It, startups are hard, as you know, right? So you have to have like a bigger motivator. I think like earlier in my career, it was about things like, oh, let's build a big company and, and that sort of thing. But what I realized is that, to really be able to see something to a finish, you just have to have a bigger, broader goal. And the reality is, like, if you look around, I mean, everybody everywhere is complaining about meetings, meeting burnout, too many meetings, not enough time spent. There are organizations that are doing things like canceling all meetings so that they can declare bankruptcy on meetings and then start from scratch. Like a lot of crazy things going on. And it's a real meaningful way that organizations are everywhere spending time. So in 5 years, if we can get to a place where nobody's complaining about meetings, and we can look back and say that it was because of a lot of the things that we helped do that's the case, and organizations everywhere are a lot more productive, and we've done that for the future of work, then I think like that's something to really be proud of. And if we do that, there's a lot of people that we can solve that problem for, right? Like, so it is a like very, very large market, very large surface area. But really that's what it is. Like, all we're trying to do is make people happier at work, make sure that they're spending their time effectively. And we're doing that through the largest surface area, which we think is meetings.
Yeah, it's terrific, man. When you look at some of the biggest potential obstacles in driving that landscape and in educating the market and in creating a category, as you stated, what are some of the biggest obstacles you foresee or that you've already been able to overcome in growing Fellow?
Yeah, so I think obviously it's like different problems at different stages.
Yeah.
The biggest problem in this area is that people, I would say, like we're at the stage where it's an education problem, right? So this is the very interesting contrast. So when we were working on my last company, we were building an online survey product. We didn't have to convince anyone to do surveys. Arguably now people, like, there's just too many surveys out there. But back at that time, there's no one we had to convince to like do a survey. People largely knew that they needed to do surveys. The only game we were playing was to try and convince people that they should use our product, which was called Fluid Surveys at the time, versus someone else's, right? And so that was the game that we were playing. Fellows, I would say, a harder business problem because that's not a thing that people are looking for. So what we have to do is we have to educate people that, hey, you actually do have a problem, right? And not only do you have a problem, it's solvable, which not everybody even knows. And by the way, software can help you solve that problem. And if you're looking for software to solve a problem, like we can help you do that. So it's a lot more of that like early education work and being able to articulate that. And that's just hard to do because, for most people, they're just busy doing what they do. It's their day to day, whatever fire that they need to put out. And so to be able to tell the right story to get people to pay attention to this as a, broad problem that is solvable with software, I think like that's the hard part of doing the work.
So how do you do that in the education process? How much of your marketing budget or your go-to-market budget do you have to allocate towards the education phase in the sales cycle?
Yeah, I mean, so this is a good question. And so we've been doing some of it. When you check out our content, we obviously produce a lot of content in this area and focus a lot of content marketing. That's been like a pillar of the way that we do our work. We sometimes refer to ourselves as an education first company, just to emphasize that we want to produce a lot of free content so that people can read the content, consume it, and then be able to solve some of their problems. And of course, if they want software that's just going to help them do that, like we can definitely help there. So that's how we've thought about it. So it's just, most of our marketing efforts are just around producing content. So that definitely has been like a primary pillar. The world of content is changing though, right? So I think, some of the things that we're evaluating right now are, yes, we've been doing things that way, but what does the future look like? And is that going to be like the best way to do things going forward? It's, all of the AI, ChatGPT, and everything else tools are like really affecting what people use search engines for. So I'm not sure that that's the best way to do things going forward. It's a real question that you have to be able to answer. And so, yeah, it's one of those things that we're actively thinking about, and we're trying to think about and plan the future of like, what is the best way to educate people in a world where search engines aren't going to be used in the same way.
Yeah. Any early insights on that?
Yeah. I mean, There are insights, but like not necessarily proven. I think some things that will stay the same. Um, if you own a relationship with someone, meaning that you have their contact info, say that they're already in your product, and you have a communication channel with them either through your product or with email, like that's something that you can hold on to, forever. Like you can keep emailing people, and like that can be a way that you can start conversations. At the same time, everybody gets too many emails and there's too many newsletters out there. So, that may not be as true. Short form video seems to be like a good way that people are consuming content. And so that may be, continue to be a channel, but maybe at least won't be disrupted in the same way as fast. So this could be another area. And ultimately, like the best type of education is word of mouth. So anything that you can do. So ultimately, like especially if, and again, most of your listeners are growth stage companies, right? So anything that you can do to use your current user base, your current customer base, and use them as a channel. I mean, that is, no matter how much marketing, no matter how much sales methods we invent, that nothing's ever going to beat that. So I think it's also recognizing that, and maybe investing in things like customer service and support and training materials and like all the things that market to your own customers, because they can be your brand ambassadors. So maybe some of the spend that we traditionally spent in user acquisition, we spend on customer marketing as an example. And so but again, a lot of ideas. You have to validate, you have to execute, and then see what works for your business. But the one thing that is for certain is that it's not going to be the same. And so we're going to have to reinvent ourselves.
A lot of people I talk to in terms of creating a category are, they leverage analysts, right? Gartner, Forrester, whoever it might be, to help them create that category. Is that something that you guys are currently doing as part of your go-to-market or as part of your education strategy?
Yeah, I mean, so this is a good question. We have not yet. That may be something that we consider in the future, and it's not so much that we're actively focusing on category creation as like this business task that we have to do. We just recognize that it's not every company everywhere that currently thinks, oh, I need a meeting productivity tool. Like it's just not a thing that people go off and we also need one of those. We need a CRM. We need like an email tool. We need this and that. So it's just like, it doesn't fit there. And it's not necessarily that we have to go and do these steps so that a category gets created. And I know that you can talk to analysts and that certainly helps. And that would be part of the process. But I think like by the sheer fact of like, if we can build a product that really solves a problem that people will talk about, then eventually enough people will use it that it will become a category. It's not really like a thing that we have to necessarily define. If we can make this class of software successful, then that will happen. And I think like that's our aim, but you can't aim to do that. You have to aim to solve, customer problems in such a great way that they will talk about it. And if you do those things, then one day you'll look back and say, hey, there's a category. Not only is Fellow successful, but all these cheap knockoffs that, aren't as good are also successful because this is a category and everybody needs it. And so I like the example of, peanut butter is a category, right? Like there's Jif and everybody knows it. And then there's all the other things that are also successful and also make a lot of money. So when that day comes that when our cheap knockoff competitors also make a lot of money, we'll know that, the category has arrived.
The GIF of saving meetings. That's what I'm going to call you guys from now on.
Someone has to build it. So
awesome, man. Well, this has been so fun today. I want to close us off on our founder 5. So 5 quick hit questions about you and your growth. And the first one is, what is the top metric or KPI that you are relentlessly focused on?
Yeah, so we focus on our meeting hosted metric. Because it just, it's not about users that sign up, but it's about like how many meetings are we making more productive. So that's what we focus on.
Excellent. Very cool. All right. Top tip for growth stage founders like yourself.
Yeah. So, super tactical tip is, I'm sure it's been recommended on your show, is Elad Gil's book, High Growth Handbook. It's awesome. And I listen to the audiobook often. So sometimes when I'm making a hire in a particular department, I'll go back and like listen to that section of the book again, because it's really that good.
Nice. All right. Piece of advice that counters traditional wisdom.
Yeah. So if someone gives you advice, run away. What's much better than advice is to hear stories of someone saying, there was this one time in my company that these things happened and I decided to do this and these were the results, versus you should go do this, because there's no advice that works all the time. There's a lot of these like phrases that people keep repeating, and because it's been repeated a lot, people think that it's always true. But there's no playbook to building businesses, because if there was, everyone would be successful, and clearly they're not.
Or there's a playbook, but there's so many plays that you'll give yourself analysis paralysis trying to learn it, right? So yeah. All right. Last one. What is going to be the title of your autobiography?
Yeah, it's going to be fall in love with what you do.
Boom, mic drop.
And so that's the, well, it's just kind of lending. It's just kind of lending attention to, a lot of people talk about find what you love and then do that. And I think you can search for a lifetime and never find that thing. So I think it's, falling in love with what you do. And if you can do that, you're going to put your all into it. You're going to do what other people are not willing to. You'll be very successful at it, and you'll enjoy the process.
Excellent words, Aydin. All right. Closing us off here, you've given a ton back to our listeners today. So time for a little bit of self-promotion. How can those listening help you out? I would say, if you're worried about how people in your company are spending their time, and you think that meetings could be made more efficient, check us out at Fellow.app. I'm also the host of a podcast focused on management and leadership specifically. It's called Super Managers. So if you're interested in getting better at the art of managing teams and becoming a better leader, check that out. And I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn, easy to find, happy to help in any way someone thinks that can be useful. And I highly encourage you guys check out Aydin's podcast. He's dropping knowledge left and right. Thank you for joining today, man. Having you on the dirt has been a blast. And, maybe we'll have you on for part 2 sometime.
All right. Thank you so much, Jim. Really appreciate you having me on.
You bet.